Hello again, YouTube. It's been quite a while since I've made a video. I actually have found two more witnesses to this gigantic triangular ship that hovers barely above the ground, above an interstate freeway, US 23, just south of Flint, Michigan. And I was going to make this video about a month and a half ago when I started, and I just deleted all the files and went, I give up. I mean, I think this is so. I've been in kind of a weird headspace with this stuff. I feel like I always felt like people should know this, and I've come to a point where I feel like people can only know this, or they'll only believe it when they see it. And when I say know this, I mean I don't know what this stuff is, but there are these bizarre craft that are around that do things that I don't think we can do. So you take it from there. I don't know. And when I say do things that we can't do, I'm not just referring to the performance capabilities of these craft. I mean, things happen to people that get too close to them that, like time and space get distorted. They lose time. They end up driving the wrong way in a freeway. If you've seen my previous videos, my coworker swears she had a baby as a consequence. I mean, we're not talking just, they can drive real fast or whatever. But this situation is so strange and so bizarre. I've never heard of anything like it, and I don't think mainstream ufologists even believe it. Or like MUFON, I don't know if they believe this. I mean, over a span of like 30 years, I've now met, I don't know, at least half a dozen people, I'm sure more actually, that have seen this gigantic triangular ship almost on the damned ground at the same spot, on different years. I had this happen in 94, March the 18th. I had a high school buddy see it in 95. The people I just found saw it in either 97 or 98. They can't recall which year it was, which I found pretty bizarre. And in my case, I saw the thing in 94, and then there was ongoing weirdness afterwards, and I was not into the paranormal whatsoever. But I just want to document this. So with that, I'm going to shut up. I really don't even feel like making this video, but I think it's important. So how did I find these two new witnesses? I belong to a Facebook group called the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters Podcast Facebook group, right? That is a Facebook group that also has a podcast that's on YouTube and Spotify and elsewhere. And it's run by a husband and wife, Wayne and Michelle Braden, who I believe it was in 2018, they were driving on a freeway down near Detroit, in a suburb of Detroit near Ford Road. I really don't know that area, but very much like myself, they saw this huge triangular ship, like not far above their car, right? And Wayne is a high school earth sciences teacher, and his wife is, I believe, a middle school English teacher. So these are not crazy people. Wayne is ex-military. He was in an airborne division of the Army and jumped out of planes. I know at one time he was a licensed pilot. I know his father's a commercial pilot, a retired airline pilot. So they're very grounded kind of people, and this shocked them so much, they started this Facebook group and this podcast, right? And so I met them. I'm in this group. They have over 7,000 members. There's so many people, I rarely ever look at that group, that page, right? So a guy posted, told his story in a post in that group, and I didn't see it, but Wayne responded to him by simply typing Guy Merritt, which on Facebook, if somebody types your name like that, there'll be a little red circle up in you open it up, there's a notification that somebody has mentioned your name, kind of like, hey, Guy Merritt, look at this. So that's how I knew to look at this post, and I read it, and I was pretty stunned. Okay, so I took a short break, and I ran up and got a haircut. Not really. Actually, I took another month off of this thing, and I've had some health issues. My back is all messed up. I've got scoliosis and stenosis, which is, a degeneration of the spine. I'm in physical therapy. And I'd reached a point, too, where I felt like, this story is so crazy, why even tell it, right? I recently had lunch. I was sat face-to-face with another witness by the name of Alex, right? We talked for 2 hours. In 94, when this happened, I quit my job 2 weeks later. I lost track of the few people who were involved. A couple of them didn't want to talk about it. I did a podcast in 2017 and Alex heard it and he reached out to the podcast and we actually did one together subsequently. Whereas I had this happen on March 18th of 1994, Alex had the identical experience in absolutely every way. Saw the same craft, or seemingly the same craft, above the same grove of trees, got the same message in his head, you're not supposed to be here, blah, blah, blah. But on March the 23rd of 2019, 25 years later, just totally crazy, but just meant a lot for me to be able to be in the same room with him and talk for hours and give him a hug. It was a big deal to me. Alex is just a wonderful young guy. He's smart, thoughtful, introspective. I had not met him in person, even though we'd done this podcast together. So, again, it just meant an awful lot. And I'll always feel connected to Alex because of this crazy thing that we experienced. And both he and I talked about the fact that we can't find anything in UFO literature or in documentaries or anything that is remotely like this, all right, where so many people have seen this gigantic triangular ship barely above the ground next to an interstate freeway a couple of miles south of a congested urban area. It's never been in the newspaper, and we've got people missing time, and it's been going on that we know of for 30 years at least, right? And we can't find anything else that kind of conforms to this story. It's so bizarre. It's lonely. We talked about that. I think a lot of people in the UFO community don't even buy it. I don't know. But anyway, with that, I found two more witnesses that saw this thing just about the same place. Let's talk about what the one witness told me. I talked to one of the people. His name's Jeremy. And what did he say? It's all pretty strange. In fact, I think, kind of like my coworkers who went missing for an hour or so, I think something may have happened to him and his passenger because, well, you'll see why when I read you what he wrote. Okay, so my friend Wayne, who runs this Facebook group, which is dedicated to looking at paranormal things and UFOs in Michigan, says, "Hey, guy, look at this." And Jeremy writes the following, quote, "I don't recall the year exactly. It was right around 1997 or 1998. My friend and I witnessed a large triangular-shaped craft hovering just above what used to be a farm field, which is now condos, at Grand Blanc Road and US 23. It was right at about the height of the trees and right next to that field. We were on our way home at the time, having worked at Genesee Valley Mall, and would normally take the Hill Road exit. But I could see the lights from this thing all the way down the highway, so I decided to go to the next exit to see what was going on. We were completely awestruck by the massive size of this thing as it just hovered in place above that field. I got off at that exit and was going to turn right onto Grand Blanc Road and park on the side of the road where there is now a Speedway gas station so we could get a much better look at it. But right as I was coming to the top of the ramp, my friend who was in the passenger seat exclaimed, "It's moving! It's moving! It's gone!" I looked back just in time to see it shoot straight up instantly and disappear into the night sky. It was crazy how fast it was just gone. That is about 3/4 of a mile north of where all the rest of us have seen this. So, slight variation there, but... And I was not surprised that Jeremy described this thing very much like the rest of us. This mammoth triangular craft, silent, 3 brilliant balls of white light on each tip. And he said that he didn't recall there being a light on the bottom until he watched one of my videos on YouTube. And he said at which point he recalled that there was this big light on the bottom, but he thought it was white. That's interesting in a couple of ways. Number one, it speaks to the veracity of what he's not parroting what the rest of us have said, because we all saw a red light, right? He's not just repeating a story. And I found it weird, too, that he'd forgotten that. I mean, it's a pretty big thing to forget because that light was large. And he did not see a grid-like pattern on the bottom because sounds like he was looking at the thing on a horizontal, whereas a number of us have been right underneath it, so that's not a big deal. But it feels like the guy's memory has been fiddled with or something. It reminds me a lot of my coworkers that were missing. I mean, he's remembering it in bits and pieces, which I find strange. Okay, so of course I'm going to message Jeremy, right? I got to talk to this guy. And I let him know that, like, over a span of 30 years that I know of, there's a whole bunch of us that have seen this gigantic triangular UFO almost on the ground sitting next to US 23. And by the way, he has no familiarity with me or any UFO lore having to do with US 23 and triangles and any of that stuff. He thinks he's solo in his thing, right? Anyway, at some point, I sent Jeremy a link to watch part 1 of my UFO series that I'd made about this whole thing and put on YouTube. And he watched part 1 and wrote back. And this is when things get really strange to me. He says, "Guy, so I watched your first episode on the event you experienced, but I've not yet watched the second. But here's the thing. You pointed out how I said that I didn't remember the exact year that I saw this, and I mentioned that to my friend who was with me at the time. She started talking about what she remembered about the whole deal, and her memory of where it occurred and where we were going are completely different than what I remember. So now I am really perplexed by this." Yeah, I'll bet. That's crazy. I mean, he goes on, "I told her what I remembered of where and when it occurred and that we were coming home from Genesee Valley Mall after work. She said no, we were on our way to Genesee Valley Mall going to work. I said I remember seeing it at US 23 and Grand Blanc Road and off the passenger side of the vehicle. She says it was by Heatherwood Apartments and she saw it out the driver's side window while I was driving. At the time we lived in Thornridge Apartments and Heatherwood was right behind that complex." Okay, so Jeremy gives this very detailed description of how this all came down, right? He says they just left work, they're traveling south on US 23. He gives landmarks. They come to Hill Road, they see lights, they go on to Grand Blanc Road, they go up the ramp, yada, yada, yada. He's quite specific about what happened. He talks to his passenger, I think it was his girlfriend at the time, right? And mentions this all to her, and she says, no, we were on our way to work. We were going north near Heatherwood Apartments, which is like 1.5 miles east on a road called Fenton Road. Like, huh? So, okay, this is totally bizarre. I mean, this is making me wonder, did something happen to them like my coworkers? Here's the deal. Trust me on this. You see what I saw and what he saw, which is an absolutely, as he said, mammoth, triangular ship sitting next to an interstate freeway, 100 foot in the air. You might forget what year it was, although that's uncommon. But if you've got 2 people in the car, you're not going to forget the general circumstances. You're not going to have one person say, "Remember the time we saw that huge UFO that shot straight into the stratosphere like a bullet and we were coming home from work?" And then the other person says, "Oh no, we weren't on US 23. We were 1.5 miles east on Fenton Road, by Heatherwood Apartments going north on our way to work." I mean, that is not a thing that could happen. I mean, it's just, you ask anybody that has seen a UFO close up, with multiple people. I mean, something is going on here that is more than, I'm thinking at this point already, more than a sighting. Okay, so let me try to summarize the weirdness of this whole thing. Nobody's ever going to believe this, right? Here's another guy or 2 people, depending upon how you want to look at this thing, that, over a span of 30 years, I've now found 12 people or something who was driving south on US 23, just south of Flint, Michigan, a congested urban area, and, next to US 23 sees this gigantic, silent, triangular UFO 100 foot in the air with these brilliant white lights on the tips. And in fact, in this case, him and his passenger watched this thing shoot straight into the stratosphere like a bullet, right? In their case, they think it was 1997 or 98. Now, how you would forget the year, I don't know. Most people do not. Jeremy said, "Well, I'm kind of like that. My memory's like that." Like, okay. But then you've got the added screwiness that his girlfriend says, "No, we weren't driving south on US 23 coming home from work. we were over on Fenton Road about a mile and a half east driving north on our way to work, right? I mean, Jeremy, in fact, told me originally, too, he said that when they saw this thing, I've given you his description, right? He says that they raced to their apartment, changed their clothes, and then raced to his parents' house to tell him what had happened. So he's got this very specific, detailed memory of how it all came down, right? And then his girlfriend says, no, we were on our way to work, blah, blah, blah. That's just totally nuts. You might forget the year, but you're not going to forget the general circumstances under which you see something like this, trust me. You don't see a gigantic, a mammoth triangle hovering next to an interstate freeway, right? And then, forget which way you were driving and what you were doing. That just does not happen, right? Jeremy writes me this long rambling paragraph at one point on Messenger, and he's thinking out loud, right? Saying, well, we were working here, doing this, that. He's going through, where they had worked, what they had done. He finally says, now I'm wondering if I've seen this more than once. Again, that's something, you don't see this, you don't see something like this and forget if you saw it once or twice or 3 times or whatever. That's just crazy. And he was quite sincere, He was confused. And this is what makes me think, kind of like my coworkers, that something besides that this may have not been just a sighting, because you don't forget these things. You don't get these kind of conflicting reports from, a driver and a passenger. You don't go, wow, did I see this once? Did this happen once? Or did I see it more than once? I mean, what? No, you would remember. If you've ever seen a UFO up close like this, and this thing's huge, it's huge, right? As he said, it's mammoth. You don't forget, how many times this happened, unless some sort of chemical or some sort of technology, in my opinion, has screwed with your memory. All right, the final insane feature of this whole thing, and it's something that harkens back to my own experience. I saw what sounds like the same kind of craft at just about the same spot. In my case, it was 5 a.m. There wasn't a lot of traffic, but there were cars. The morning rush had kind of started, and here's this gigantic triangular ship, 100 foot in the air, right next to the freeway, and I'm the only person even hitting my brakes, right? Jeremy says they'd gotten off work at the mall. Let's say the mall had just closed. The mall closes at 9 o'clock, right? So let's say maybe it's 10 p.m. at night. They're just south of Flint, Michigan. They come up to they're going to get off the Hill Road exit, and they see these brilliant white lights down the road all the way at turns out to be down by Grand Blanc Road, right? So they drive down there and they see this thing. At that point on US 23, just south of Flint, at 10 o'clock at night, hundreds of cars should have seen this thing, right? There's no way this wouldn't have been this big deal and been in the newspaper, and it just this is so crazy, and you hear this over and over. I mean, it's researchers say a lot of researchers say sometimes it appears that only some people can see these darn things, it sounds nuts, but I mean, how could what he said be true and this didn't make headlines? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, but that's the final. It's just crazy. And I believe the guy. In my case, 2 ladies carpooling to work at 10 o'clock the night before, according to MUFON, right? At the same spot where I saw this thing, they drove under it, and it was not just to the right of the freeway. It was straddling both lanes at 10 o'clock at night. Same thing. Nothing in the newspaper. Wasn't a big news story. Sounds like they were the only ones that could see the damn thing, because you wouldn't see this and not call somebody or call a lot of people. It's crazy. Okay, so what can we make of all of this? I've been jacking with this video for months, and I just want to wrap this up, even if this is messed up, the dog barks, whatever it's going to be in here, right? As Alex and I discussed, as best as we can tell, as insane, as bonkers, as out there as this sounds, for lack of a better word, aliens, or something like aliens, is conducting a catch and release program south of Flint, Michigan, and flying these triangles barely above the ground over a period of like 30 years, right? And we keep finding more and more people. It's just the craziest thing. And nobody's going to believe it. You're not going to call Richard Dolan or some Linda Moulton Howard. I don't think anybody, and have them believe this. And yet we've got all these people. So I don't know. You tell me what's going on. We're all lying or nuts or having the identical delusions, right? The other thing that I find interesting, I want to mention real quick. Jeremy wrote me this long thing, and I'm not going to read it. But the summary of it is this. And it's important that people that have this, that see UFOs, seem to have other odd stuff happen. And Jeremy's one. He said, I did have this weird thing happen. He said, I watched your video where you said you saw some lights when you were 14. And he said he was camping with his parents down in Kentucky to see some, they'd gone on a vacation. They were in this kind of remote camp area. And he said they had a huge bonfire. And he said they were standing there and he saw this huge orange-red fireball come across above them, and he was in awe of this thing, and he watched it fly across the sky, and it reached a point it went down. He thought he was going to hear a huge explosion, right? And he said they had this roaring campfire going, and he said as this thing went over, the campfire just went out, right? And he watched this. There was no explosion, and he was like, wow. And he looked at his parents. The fire came back on. And he said, did you see that? And they all went, what are you talking about? They didn't see anything. And he's a very sincere guy, didn't make a big deal out of it. He also said on a couple of occasions he's gone to turn his computer on, and when his finger got that far from the button to turn it on, it just turned on, right? And I believe the guy, because I've been living this stuff. So what's going on? I don't know. I'm going to wrap this up. This was very long and kind of disjointed. I don't feel very good. I don't have a lot of time to make these. I'm 72.5, and I'm kind of like that fireball he saw, kind of going downhill here. So, but anyway, I hope this made sense. I think this stuff is worth documenting. I don't know what the hell it is. I think apparently aliens are a real thing, so pretty clear to me. But people want to argue that it's all the government or some crazy thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't think that's true, but maybe I'm wrong. So. Be nice to each other, and I'm out.